Welcome to Desperately Seeking the 80s. I am Meg.
And I am Jessica. And Meg and I have been friends since 1982. We got through middle school and high school together here in New York City, where we still live.
And where we podcast about New York City in the 80s. I do Rip from the Headlines.
And I do pop culture.
This is our second story that we are recording, or our second episode that we are recording today. We're a little punchy.
Are we still here?
We're here.
Who are you?
It's going to be great.
I'm very excited to talk about whatever we're going to talk about. Can I lie down?
Oh, you may not lie down and you may not eat.
I keep trying to eat my trail mix.
No eating of the trail mix.
All right.
No, and all of the listeners are thanking me right now that you are not chomping trail mix into the mic. Stop it.
I'm very tired, Meg. And I was at best at like 60% lucidity. So let's hope to at least maintain at 60.
Yeah, no, let's get into punchiness.
All right, here we go.
Your engagement question is,
yes,
when I say easy listening, who do you think of?
I thought you were like, when I say, hey, you go. Wait, what? Well, I say, when you say easy listening, what do I think of?
Yeah.
Easy like Sunday morning. I think of the Commodores. I think of the Pina Colada song. I think of Mellow Gold. I think of
bands, more artists, soft rock.
Christopher Cross.
Oh,
sailing.
About like
take me away. Well, yacht rock. It's all yacht rock.
Yeah.
So it's
Neil
like
Sedaka.
Pilot. Like, yeah, Neil Sedaka. Yeah, but Neil Sedaka was like a little earlier. I'm thinking of like, you know what I'm trying to remember? What the music was for the Reuniti on Ice ad. Remember those?
No.
They always showed like a couple drinking Reuniti on ice on a boat of some kind, like sailing, just the two of them with a sunset. Like, ooh. But yeah, yacht rock.
Okay.
I'm gonna go with Christopher Cross. That's to me like that's number one with a bullet.
Okay. My sources today: Little Girl Blue, which is a book by Randy Schmidt, which I listened to the audiobook of.
Mm-hmm.
And Superstar, the Karen Carpenter story, directed by Todd Haynes and released in 1987. And I watched that, and it is fascinating. Do you know about this documentary he did?
No.
He did it while he was in college or grad school, I'm not sure. And it's all Barbie doll.
Oh, that one.
Mm-hmm.
Did you know that in his 1999 film, Velvet Goldmine, about, his sort of version of David Bowie and his crowd, glam rock, they did a whole scene with Barbies.
Well, see, and he started it in his youth.
I'm just saying the guy liked a Barbie doll. Big time.
In the fall of 1982, Karen Carpenter, lead singer and drummer of the brother-sister music duo, The Carpenters, moved from L.A. to New York to work with Stephen Levenkron, a psychotherapist who is known for his work treating a mysterious condition few had heard of, anorexia nervosa. 32-year-old 5'4" Karen weighed about 84 pounds. Back when she was 17, she weighed 145 pounds, and her mother took her to a doctor who put her on the Stillman water diet. This diet, which I looked up, which is still in circulation, strictly forbids carbohydrates, vegetables, fruits, and fats, and you must drink 8 glasses of water a day.
So what are you eating, like beef jerky and water?
That was my question. I kept reading. I found out. You can eat as much broiled chicken, seafood, eggs, and non-fat cottage cheese as you want. No oil. Karen lost 25 pounds in 6 weeks and kept her weight at 120 for a few years, which was pretty reasonable for her height.
Mm-hmm.
Karen grew up in a tight-knit conservative family. Her parents, Agnes and Howard, and brother Richard. Richard showed musical promise, specifically on the piano when he was little, so the family moved from New Haven to Los Angeles to help his career. Karen, the younger sister.
I love that he's like 9 and they're like, you have to, your career is starting now.
He was a teenager, though.
Okay.
Yeah. And Karen was 4 years younger. She was the younger sister. She adored him, and she followed in his footsteps into music. She would say anything that he wanted to do, I was doing it in his shadow. And she was at first an accomplished drummer. They needed a drummer, so she learned how to drum, and she got really good. And she was the only girl drummer anywhere. And that was kind of a novelty, and she really loved it.
As a quick side note, I can't recall if this is what the circumstances were, but look up the fact that she was considered the only rival to John Bonham.
Interesting.
Yes, indeed.
Then, as her voice matured into this lush alto sound, she became an astonishingly beautiful singer. What makes the sound of the Carpenters distinctive, and this was under Richard's arrangements, was its use of overdubbing, which I guess Les Paul started playing with, and Richard saw him playing with it, and then he got the equipment so he could do it too. And they do a lot of, or Karen does a lot of back phrasing, which I thought was particularly interesting considering she's a drummer. So she's got the rhythm so in her head that she can play around and it's all going to end up being okay.
Wait, what's back phrasing?
Back phrasing is when you don't sing with the rhythm of the song. The song is keeping the rhythm and you're playing all over the place. And if you're not really skilled, if you don't have a good sense of rhythm, then it kind of ends up being a mess.
Got it.
But I think she was super successful at that because she was a drummer.
As every dude I ever met who played guitar would say, she was in the pocket.
Yeah. And it's also sort of interesting because they were a very tightly wound group as far as the music was concerned. It was extremely regimented music. It wasn't, you're talking about all these other bands that were popular at the time were super loose. And Richard kept a tight ship. So it's also interesting to me that she was like, but this is how I like to sing, which is a lot looser, but also it's all going to add up in the end.
Mm-hmm.
She was a talent. She also sang extremely quietly and closely into the mic. So there was the effect of it just being like she's whispering in your ear. And some people were saying friends of hers would be in a car with her when she was practicing on the way to a recording studio, and they could barely hear her. Without a mic, there's no way someone on the other side of the room would have heard her. She's so quiet. But because of amplification and because of the recording technology at the time, it's such a full sound. You would just never realize that it's coming from such a small place. Interesting, right?
Mm.
So the Carpenters had a string of hit singles in the 70s. Close to You, We've Only Just Begun, Rainy Days and Mondays, Superstar. What were you singing just before?
Superstar.
Okay. They epitomized soft rock at the time. Their squeaky clean image and awkward stage presence put them at a disadvantage in the decade of Led Zeppelin, Pink Floyd, The Grateful Dead. They sold a lot of albums, but people were pretty embarrassed about liking them. So lots of people told stories about like kind of surreptitiously going to the guy who sold records and being like, yeah, I kind of would like the Carpenters. Can I get the Carpenters record? And like nobody wanted it. There was a stigma.
Have you listened to We've Only Just Begun recently?
Absolutely.
How amazing is it when they finally drop the beat and you're in it and you're like, yeah! You're like, the Carpenters have so much crunch.
Da, 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 along the way.
Yes.
That's what you're talking about.
Yes, I am.
The Carpenters were really square.
Have you seen Richard's hair from the time? It was literally square.
Yeah, both of them had very square hair. Now, while she was extraordinarily talented, Paul McCartney at the time said she had the best female voice in the world. Can you imagine hearing that about yourself from Paul McCartney?
And yet,
Karen was treated like a little girl her whole life. She and Richard still lived at home when he was 30 and she was 26. No one in her family seemed to think she could make good decisions for herself. Richard was the golden boy and the boss of the Carpenters. Karen did what she was told. The 2 times she attempted independence, the results were catastrophic. In 1979, when Richard went to rehab for Quaalude abuse, he went off on Neil Sedaka.
Is that how mellow they were? Is that why they were so mellow?
No, Quaaludes made him mad and angry, and he lost it he was losing it on people. He was so angry, and he yelled at Neil Sedaka. Sweet Neil Sedaka.
Who yells at Neil Sedaka?
And Neil Sedaka's like, why are you yelling at me?
I'm Neil Sedaka.
And I'm a really nice person. Have you heard my songs?
I do believe that a dear friend of mine who listens to the podcast, who is a couple of years older than us, went to the prom with Neil Sedaka's son.
Interesting.
Yes.
Okay. So they had to take a hiatus because Richard needed to go.
Richard needed a rest.
Yes, for sure. And Karen decided to go to New York to make a solo album with producer Phil Ramone at A&R Recording Studios on West 48th Street. She and Phil had a wonderful time creating a whole new sound for her. Richard had made her promise she wouldn't do disco. God forbid. But she loved disco. Loved it. And Olivia Newton-John was a very close friend of hers, and Karen figured if Olivia Newton-John could pull off disco, she could too. Phil Ramone's girlfriend, Itchy.
Stop it right now. In the 70s, if your name is Itchy, that's not good. That's like, how are you? Itchy.
She became Karen's best friend, and Karen stayed at Phil and Itchy's place in Pound Ridge. You know Pound Ridge.
I do. I'm still laughing about Itchy. I'm sorry. I'm just enjoying that.
And Karen and Phil drove to the New York City studio every morning talking about the work ahead and laid tracks before heading home at the end of the day. It was really just lovely. It was a lovely period of time for her. She had spent her whole life doing what Richard said, happily so. She loved him. She had so much respect for him. She was his biggest fan. But it was kind of cool. Like he was always the boss. And here people were asking her what her opinion was of what she wanted to do. And for the first time, she was like, I think I want to do this and I want to do that. And Phil Ramone is so talented. And so she was being guided to this new reawakening. When she went on tour, it was because their record company insisted on it. But being on stage was always a little awkward. I mean, if you watch it's so weird. It's so stiff. It's so strange. and their record,
the pain in your face and your voice, just recalling watching this video.
And it's like, why didn't they hire someone to help loosen things up?
Because Richard liked it tight.
Well, actually, yes, we're going to talk about that in a second. And also A&M, their record label, they were a little square too. So they're like, ooh, these are our squeaky clean kids. And they wanted to keep them that way. So they weren't into things being loosened.
You know what's interesting though? Because I'm sure you've listened to Superstar recently. Not that squeaky clean. That's not a clean song at all. And in fact,
you mean the lyrics?
Yes. And in fact, the lyrics on most other covers are changed because it's it's too sexual.
That is interesting. I don't know if it was interpreted that way at the.
Oh, it could not be missed
from her though, because I'll tell you, A&M wouldn't let them record things that were obviously risque.
It was there's the one thing I'm thinking about is a double entendre. It's about coming. It's about coming.
Oh, yeah. I wonder if Karen picked up on that.
She would have had to have never had sex in her life if she hadn't picked up on it. And that's maybe that's where you're going with this.
She was a late bloomer. Anyway, okay. So the Carpenters could never get the live thing right. Richard always wanted the stage shows to replicate the recordings perfectly. For him, it was like, if we can get the band to just replicate what is on the record, we have done our job.
But that's not what entertainment is, Richard.
It is not, and it's so fucking stressful to do that.
I'm sure that Karen didn't handle the stress very well, segue.
In her brief period of independence in New York, Karen explored different music styles. She started singing in a higher register, which she hadn't done for years. She had glamorous photos taken of her in loose clothing. So different from the goody two-shoes photos her record company always insisted on, that also looked a little incestuous.
Yes, they did. It was uncomfortable to look at.
Yeah.
They looked a little too loving.
They just couldn't figure it out. And their interviews with her where she's like, we'll just do what you want us to do. Every time we do something, we get so much criticism. Just tell us what you want from us. And I was listening to this interview going like, you don't sound like an artist. Like, that's not usually what artists say. They don't say, just tell me what to do and I'll do it.
No, I mean, but she wasn't raised to be an artist from what you're saying.
But
she was raised to be a technician.
But she snuck it in. And in this brief period in New York, she was finding her own voice, literally.
Wait, so tell me again, this was in 79 that she was in Pound Ridge?
Yes.
Okay.
So when she got back to LA and played the tracks for Richard and the A&M executives, it didn't go well. They hated what they heard and told her she should scratch the whole project. It wasn't even worth trying to fix. Phil Ramone was shocked. He'd never in his entire career been treated that way. People were always like, that sounds groovy, or maybe we can, pick that one over that one, or should we redo that? No one ever scrapped the entire thing. Unheard of. He was just stunned. He didn't know what was going on. But Karen acquiesced, and the project was canceled. A&M even made her repay them $400,000 from her own pocket for expenses they had fronted. They punished her.
What? $400,000?
They punished her.
That's insane.
Her other attempt at independence was marrying real estate developer Tom Burris on October 31st, 1980. Burris had swept her off her feet, whisking her away on yachts and in fancy cars. She wanted desperately to be a mother and believed she'd finally be able to settle down and start a family. A couple weeks before their lavish wedding at the Beverly Hills Hotel, Burris confessed he'd had a vasectomy. Karen wanted to cancel the wedding, but her mother, Agnes, told her it would be too embarrassing. People magazine was doing a spread on it. Whatever mistake Karen made by picking this guy, she was going to have to live with it, according to Agnes. So she went through with it.
Was Karen still on the diet at this point?
Really, she only stayed at a healthy weight, that healthy 120 weight, for a few years. She's been gradually losing weight since then. So at the time of her wedding, she was very skinny. Like I said, when they did the glamour photos of her in New York, she had to have loose clothing. And there's that gaunt look in her face. She's 30 years old right now, and she looks 50.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, it turned out that this Burris character didn't have any money to his name. He was borrowing money from Karen, $50,000 here, $50,000 there. He gave Karen a car that she assumed he'd bought until the car people showed up to repossess it. It's horrible. He also had a violent temper. She had bruises.
Oh, for God's sake.
After 14 months, they split up. Karen weighed 84 pounds at this point. The disastrous marriage exacerbated her eating problem to the point that she couldn't ignore her issues any longer. She'd been obviously denying it to lots of people. Everyone had noticed her getting skinnier and skinnier. Some fans and the press thought maybe she had cancer. Most people outside the medical profession had never heard the term anorexia nervosa. Psychoanalyst Hilda Bruch published The Golden Cage, The Enigma of Anorexia Nervosa in 1978. And that was really the first time anybody heard about it, but who was reading that book? But then the TV movie, The Best Little Girl in the World,
I remember that,
starring Jennifer Jason Leigh, aired in 1981. That kind of blew the lid off the whole thing, and everyone was like, what? And they learned how to pronounce it, because before that, nobody even knew how it was pronounced. But no one, even the experts, knew what caused it or how to treat it. People close to her urged Karen to at least see a doctor about the possibility she may be suffering from this mysterious anorexia thing they heard about. In an effort to put some distance between herself and her mother, Karen decided to go to New York and work with Stephen Levincron, who had written the novel The Best Little Girl in the World, on which the TV movie was based. In January 1982, she moved into the Regency with Itchy and met with Levincron for an hour a day, 5 days a week. She gave herself until Thanksgiving to recover. Levincron...
How many months is that?
That'd be 11.
Okay. So she's giving herself a year to get over anorexia.
A little less than a year to get over anorexia. Levincron warned her that her recovery would take more like 3 years, but she wasn't hearing it. She's had a deadline. She was going to stick to it. And her family really did not support her being in New York. They were not a fan of this at all. Richard had recovered. He was ready to record. Where is Karen? She's with this awful doctor who he didn't trust. So she wasn't getting a lot of family support at all. She would walk a mile from the Regency to Levincron's office at 16 East 79th and back, using up what few calories she was consuming. And she was taking 80 to 90 laxatives a night.
What? Oh, no. So she's bulimic as well as anorexic.
Plus thyroid medication.
Oh, dear.
David Brenner, the comedian.
Yes.
Was a friend. They'd toured together. And when he ran into her on Madison Avenue, he was shocked. She was a skeleton. When she got down to 79 pounds, Levincron told her to stand in front of a mirror in his office wearing a bikini. She was skin and bones, but she thought she looked great. It fits, she said. When her heart started racing and she was reeling from dizziness, Itchy and Levincron got her to Lenox Hill, where they put her on an intravenous feeding tube. She was 77 pounds. She stayed in the hospital for 2 months, filing for divorce from her hospital bed, paying him $1 million to just go away, and she gained 12 pounds from the tube. On November 8th, she checked out of Lenox Hill and headed home without consulting Levincron. She was sticking to her own schedule. She felt she was cured because she had gained that 12 pounds, but remember, she gained the 12 pounds from the tube. She was home 3 months before she was found by her mother early in the morning, collapsed in her closet. She was pronounced dead at the hospital at 9:51 in the morning of February 4th, 1983. It was later determined that her death was in large part due to an overdose of Ipecac.
Oh.
Yeah. At the time, there are no warnings about what chronic overuse of Ipecac would do to a body. So she just thought, it'll help me throw it up. She didn't realize it was destroying her liver. In 2010, Rolling Stone ranked Karen 94 on its list of the 100 greatest singers of all time, calling her voice impossibly lush and almost shockingly intimate, Even the sappiest songs sound like she was staring directly into your eyes. On February 3rd, 1983, the day before her death, Karen called Phil Ramone and said, "I hope you don't mind if I curse. I still love our fucking record." Richard and A&M Records finally released Karen Carpenter, her solo album, in 1996.
How was it?
That's such a good question. It's what I haven't listened to it. What I read about it was that it was on par with Olivia Newton-John. Who else did they compare her to? Bette Midler. People who were also kind of playing around with more disco kind of music. That, I mean, you got to have the right song. But they said it was totally worthy of being released. There's no reason to shelve it. That was an overreaction. That's what the critics said in 1996.
What you also just reminded me of is that for a very long time, it was entirely okay to make Karen Carpenter jokes the same way that people made Helen Keller jokes.
Oh, that's horrible.
Do you remember that at all? About, like, oh God, I wish I could. I mean, I'm sort of glad I can't remember them, but it was, these are, okay, for those of you listening, these are not politically correct. These are simply examples. But there was the Helen Keller joke, but how did Helen Keller burn her face? Answering the iron. The woman's been dead a long time, people. She had a good life.
Totally tasteless jokes.
Yes, but there are many Karen
Which was
Carpenter
a book,
jokes.
just so that people know. There's
right,
a
but
book
no, but
called
these
Totally Tasteless Jokes.
I don't know if if the Helen Keller jokes were in it. The Karen Carpenter ones were not, but they were on par with that. It was like, if you're so skinny, blah 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 blah. But the point about it is that the reason I'm bringing this up is not to just be an idiot about it. It's that anorexia was not something that people really understood and people didn't take it seriously until they realized how prevalent it was and how many primarily girls and women suffered from it, but not at the Karen Carpenter level, so that it wasn't detectable. It was just enough to be messed up, severely messed up.
Yeah. And the people her age, the women who were her close friends who were interviewed in this book were like, look, we all had eating issues. It was rough out there. We were supposed to look like Twiggy. I mean, people weren't eating. It just wasn't a thing to eat. And so to make the distinction between this willful skinniness and something that was like, oh, she's
not well,
not okay, and really has no sense of what she looks like and how she's going to kill herself.
Big difference.
It's big difference.
Do you recall in Capote versus the Swans, there's a bit where he talks about how little they eat and what they eat.
Yeah.
And that they eat meat and they have little tiny pieces of meat. That's what they would consume when they were out to lunch.
The struggle is real. Like, it's impossible to be as skinny as what was expected unless your genes are just that way. So for everybody else, it's not easy. And it's not healthy.
It's P.S. a horror.
And it's completely consuming. I mean, there have been periods in my life, absolutely, where it's like, I can't believe how often I think about it. I'm like, what is wrong with me? I could be thinking about all kinds of things, and instead I'm thinking about my weight. Like, what the fuck?
Yeah. I mean, I think I've talked to you about this before, and I'm gonna blow the lid off this podcast, but I had an eating disorder that started in college, and I'm aware of the fact that it will never be gone. Like that, once whatever it is clicks in, that's your life. That is always, it will never be something that is where your mind is quiet. And I think it's really interesting that people who are talking about their experiences on these weight loss drugs, one of the things that they talk about the most is that it makes the chatter in their minds about food stop.
Oh, well, that's
And
good.
so, yeah, it's not. So anyway, it's an ongoing social ill.
I also
It
thought,
just sort of changes complexion.
yeah. And I thought what was particularly interesting about Karen Carpenter in her time was, as we have frequently talked about, coming out of the 50s, her family was the kind of conservative family that wanted to keep everything very traditional. And that was a lot of pressure on her, in addition to the other stressors that happened in her life as far as professional. And then on top of that, nobody knew what it was. They just kept watching her getting smaller and smaller. And nobody knew that, frankly, the fact that she had all these stressors on her were contributing to her being that skinny. They talk about her being one of the most honest people in the world. You would never think that she would ever fib about anything. And yet she lied her ass off about what she ate. And obviously what, all the laxatives and the Ipecac and everything.
Right. But then it also begs the question, if you're sick, are you lying? Right? Like it's all part of the...
Well, she concealed it.
No, I understand that.
No,
but
she
I mean,
absolutely lied. People would say, are you taking laxatives? You have to stop that. It's really bad for you. And she would say, no, I'm not. And they'd look in her purse and she had 80
well,
laxatives.
that is definitely
Yes, it's a lot.
80. Yes, that is. That's not like...
She didn't forget about it.
Oh, 80 laxatives. That's not my... Oh, that is my bad. Wait, what? I don't know. Is there any discussion about her brother feeling guilty or any of his feelings of responsibility or not?
He does not feel responsible in any way. He still maintains that Stephen Levincron, who was a controversial figure, to be real, was not the right doctor for her, that she shouldn't have gone to New York. He kind of blames her death on that.
Well, that's very...
But he does admit, for a while, he wouldn't even admit she had anorexia, publicly at least. But now he's very open about it. But he's very controlling about how the Carpenters are written about. He tried to, and successfully, got Todd Haynes' movie squelched. So you can only see it on YouTube now. But you can see it on YouTube because I watched it on YouTube. He said he didn't want it aired because they used the Carpenters songs, but that's not why. It's because they told the story of
her
his
demise.
Family, which was kind of messed up. There was a TV movie with Cynthia Gibb that he actually gave his okay for. He was like, "You do this story of Karen Carpenter." Do you remember this at all?
I do.
It's really cheesy, but Cynthia Gibb talks about the making of that. They kept changing the script, and she talks about how frustrating it was to work on it because they were just always having rewrites. He was just being really controlling about it. Oh, God, what is her name? The woman who played the Nurse Ratched.
I have her in my mind.
Louise Fletcher. Louise Fletcher played the mother, and they filmed the scene that everyone says actually happened in real life when they were in the therapist's office, and the therapist said, "Agnes, you got to tell your daughter you love her." And Agnes couldn't do it. She was like, "I don't have to do that. That's not what we do in this family," and just wouldn't do it. So they replay that scene, and Richard Carpenter is like, "That was great," and didn't seem to understand that it was actually really fucked up. He couldn't even see that Louise Fletcher playing his mother was going to have a bit of a tone to it, that people were going to be like, "Oh my God, this woman is a nightmare." Because that was he was terrified that people would blame his mom and him. And they did after that TV movie. The look on your face. I should have just done a reenactment of the TV movie.
Holy moly.
Yeah.
Well,
so not a lot of perspective.
That is systemic damage in that family. I think that although it was not planned, it's rather fabulous that what I'm going to present is a stark contrast to what you spoke about.
Okay.
So you were talking about a female artist who was very tightly controlled and told what she could and could not do. And if she didn't do it, she was punished. Well, that's not what happened for The Clash. They released their album Sandinista in 1981 and came to the United States, specifically New York City, to support it. They were going to play, and did, at Bond's Casino, May 28, 29, 30, 31, and June 1, 2, 3, and 5.
What is Bond's Casino?
Funny you should ask. So this is in Times Square, and it no longer exists. But Bond's Casino was originally, in the 30s, a clothing department store. Bond's, I think men's department store. Maybe it was men's and women's, but a huge place.
Okay.
And they had like crazy promotional stuff, like a billboard with like 50 feet high with a man and woman, but like inside the store. And it was illuminated with crazy lighting.
That sounds kind of familiar.
And it was an enormous venue, and like with rooms and rooms and rooms of clothes upon clothes upon clothes.
Okay.
And unlike the fancy department stores, this was just like a wall of stuff like this.
Like Century 21
yes,
or something.
exactly, but on steroids.
Okay.
After that, it became a casino.
Fun.
And then after that, it became a music venue.
Okay.
And the music venue took the names of what that place once was and made it into Bond's Casino.
Clever.
Yes. So Bond's Casino was not a huge place by music venue standards. And The Clash, they weren't a big thing yet in the United States. They were still a cult favorite. They had not become the mega rock stars or punk rock stars that they became.
So was it a big deal to get so many nights in this
Well, it was
venue in
8
Times
nights.
Square?
It was 8 nights at a middling venue.
Okay.
It was good. Like I think it was their 3rd album. So they were excited that they were breaking into America and in New York.
You just talked about the Ritz a couple weeks ago.
Mhm.
How did it measure up to like the Ritz in terms of
just extraordinarily different. So the Ritz was glitzy and glammy. And this was everything that you know Times Square in the 80s to be. It was a little rougher.
Okay, got it.
Okay. And Combat Rock was the album that everyone knew. Like when we became aware of The Clash in the MTV era, speaking of the Ritz and video and all of that, the album that really broke out on MTV was Combat Rock. Anyway, Sandinista was a massive, I think it's a triple album. They're making a statement. And so because they're a cult band, it's not expected that they're going, I mean, it's amazing that they got the 8 nights.
Okay.
Well, the people who ran the venue quickly realized that they could sell a lot more tickets because they just kept selling them. They oversold the venue because the demand was so high and their greed was so high. They just oversold it. Now, were they gambling that not all the people would show up? Sort of like the way that airlines work now with overbooking flights? Well, they quickly found out that the show was oversold and they were letting too many people into the venue in the first nights of the residency. What do you call that? I'm losing words now.
The run?
The
of
run.
The show?
Thank you. And the fire department came and shut them down. And The Clash went bananas. And they were like, this is messed up. And typical of The Clash, because they're very much like, screw the man, for the people, by the people. Their tickets were very inexpensive. Which is another reason that they were able to sell. They're like $5 a piece. Like they were just there to play for people.
How did they sell all those tickets? Do we know? Did it exceed what they expected?
Certainly it did because they only booked 8 nights.
Okay, fair.
But the way that would normally have been handled is, sorry, you can get a refund or you're out of luck or whatever. But in a move that I think has inspired other bands after that, like I keep thinking it's Dave Matthews. It'll come to me, but there are other bands that have been very intent on not having their tickets sold through Ticketmaster for exorbitant prices.
Pearl Jam?
Pearl Jam, thank you. But anyway, so they had this unbelievable oversell. So the Clash said, "Oh no, 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 no. We are not going to let the promoters benefit from this. We are going to play for everybody who bought a ticket." And so they wound up playing 17 nights
Cool.
at Bond's Casino.
So everyone just rescheduled, basically.
And anyone who couldn't make the rescheduled dates, they got a refund. So that's also a big thing that pumped up the reputation of the band and got people more interested and more loyal and just helped to build their popularity. But because they had all of these extra nights, they needed more support. So they brought people in who were not punk musicians. Now, at the time, people were still thinking about punk as, the Sex Pistols. And that's not who the Clash ever were. And the Clash was very influenced, and they were very open about being influenced by all kinds of music that had nothing to do with punk or even hard rock. So they wound up having a lineup to support them that their fans or their budding fans were not that interested in.
Uh-oh.
And that caused a bit of a hubbub.
No.
And so
did people misbehave?
The acts that they had to support them were amazing. They had The Fall, Grandmaster Flash and the Furious Five, the Dead Kennedys, Bad Brains, Lee Scratch Perry, Kraut, Melly Mel, amazing stuff. And the crowd really went crazy with Grandmaster Flash, hating them.
Oh.
And, they're doing call and response with "fuck you" instead of whatever the response was supposed to be. And the Clash came out and said, "They are the Clash. We are them. They are us. If you don't like them, you don't like the Clash." And I was like, you fucking...
Such gentlemen.
Such gentlemen, indeed. When Melly Mel said that when they tried to do Beat Street and it was hey ho, that's when people screamed, "fuck you."
That's just
now
not
interesting. Nice. No, but what I thought was kind of fun was that I found the set list from certainly one of their 17 nights, and just imagine being in not the biggest club, not with the most video screen splashy stuff, an intimate setting with the Clash singing here's the second show set list: London Calling, Safe European Home, The Leader, Train in Vain, White Man in Hammersmith Palais, This Is Radio Clash, The Guns of Brixton, The Call Up, Bank Robber. They did 24 songs for their set.
Whoa.
They did a 3-song encore and then a 3-song second encore for a total of 30 songs. And that was every night for 17 nights. That's a working band.
Yeah.
And I did find one person's account of being there. And keep in mind, this is 81. This is when Karen Carpenter is trying to find herself. So she's in New York at the same time.
Just a few blocks away at A&R.
That these young men have come to New York City and made the music industry bend to their terms because they had the live audience that was ready to go. And think about how Richard Carpenter was keeping Karen. Everything was so controlled. Their stage stuff wasn't even the strong suit. And the Clash and so many bands like them were all about connecting with the audience. And when you were talking about the Carpenters, it really struck me what an incredible mistake that was, and what an indicator of their psychological profile it was, particularly Richard Carpenter, that it didn't occur to him that people don't go to live venues to hear what's on the album. They go to live venues to see what happens live.
We're all in the same room together.
It's a dynamic experience. He didn't
get it.
Can
I tell you another
anecdote? Please.
So there was a period of time when, remember like the Donnie and Marie show?
I was thinking of Donnie and Marie as you were talking about
so
them.
there are all these variety shows, and they're incredibly popular at the time, where they would do skits
Cher's show was unbelievable that way.
Right. And the Sonny and Cher show, though, was actually funny and entertaining.
Right,
Some
but
of them
she had
were,
she had her own
and she
variety
also
show
had her-
afterwards,
and
where she
also
had
had her own.
mostly she had a lot of women on with her singing. There's a thing with her and Carol Burnett that is not to be missed.
Well, yes, but what you're talking about is like, actually, it kind of worked. I mean,
Mhm.
it was kind of amazing.
Yeah. Incredible.
But there was lots of schlock out there, which is
For
what
sure.
I'm trying to.
Oh, I'm so sorry. Yeah.
I'm making a distinction between Cher and,
Schlock.
frankly, the variety show that they tried to get the Carpenters to do, because the Carpenters were not a live act. It wasn't their thing. But dear, sweet Karen Carpenter loved it. She was like, I get to be a ham. And she loved all the skits that were written by dumbasses and weren't funny, but she loved doing it. And she loved doing the dance routines, even though her clothes were falling off of her. And Richard hated every second of it.
Well, good. Ooh, sorry.
He didn't like people laughing. He thought that, they were laughing at him. He also really didn't like that Karen got so much attention.
Oh, girl, Richard.
But if you catch any of those variety shows, you do see she's so happy.
It's very pathetic, quite frankly. It's very sad. Well, a funny thing happened en route to seeing the Clash at Bond International Casino.
This is your fan.
Yes, one fan's unique remembrance of catching the British punk godfathers on Broadway 40 years ago this month, May 2021. So that's 3 years ago. Since my turntable broke, I can't listen to my records. It hurts because I have a promotional copy of the Clash LP London Calling that I want to spin. I don't know if it was given to me before or after I saw them at Bonds, but until recently, I played its grooves out. I'd still be doing so, but I mistakenly held the album jacket upside down before seeing the discs fall on their edges, cracking chunks of songs off of both LPs. Some songs were salvaged, and hopefully I'll be playing them again soon. I was living on 10th Street in 1981, and it may be that 4 of us assembled there before the show. If not, I was definitely doing some pre-show bonging somewhere right off Fifth Avenue. I suspect with Wheat, Sky, and The Dawn. We all lived between 8th and 16th Streets. They were keen to see the show. Was I? I don't remember telling anyone I wanted to. I was still in touch with the music scene. I wasn't a big fan of The Clash, but I knew these shows were big.
Who wrote this?
Billy Sternberg. Still, I don't know why I was at Bonds 40 years ago. I looked at the song list on Wikipedia and only really liked 3 of their songs, and each of them, Lost in the Supermarket, Rudy Can't Fail, and Spanish Bombs, are considered one of their other songs. The Wrong'em Boyo isn't even listed. I don't remember going, hoping they'd play anything in particular, like a wasted fan at the Dead one time. Pray for El Paso. I see that the Clash played a lot of their hits, but I thought their hits sucked. Train in Vain, London Calling, This Is Radio Clash. If they played Should I Stay or Should I Go, I would have left. So I was just laughing when I read that because there's so much reverence, and everything that you read about this concert, everyone's like, they're the most amazing guys ever. And this is when they broke. And it was amazing. And even I, like looking at the set list, I'm like, oh my God, I wish I was there. And this goes, I was stoned. It was stupid. So I couldn't resist sharing that one. But anyway, so that's what happened in 1981 while Karen Carpenter was having a few moments of freedom. The Clash were saying, we are freedom. Oh, look at that writing. Oh, so
good. Tying it up?
I think we tied it up already, don't you?
Pretty much. You did a lovely job. It was almost like...
It's almost like we planned it this time.
Know,
maybe we should plan a little more often. I wish that Spooky Tooth was the tie-in. Wouldn't that be... Oh, you know what? It is! How? No, I was not really. But Mick Jones of The Clash has some fucking spooky teeth. So you might want to take a look at that too. There was a lot of overlap today. No, I think the overlap is what was happening in 1981 in music in New York and the two ends of the spectrum that we presented today. But yeah, he's really got spooky teeth. Check it out.